Hello there, I'm the real-life fake wizard. On August 20th, 2026, The Hollywood Reporter published an interview with HBO's Lanterns writers Tom King and Damon Lindelof, where they specifically discussed the concepts of story and source material adaptation. Now, adaptation is a very charged term because what one person perceives as an adaptation of work, another person might call a bastardization. When we look at something like Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings films, those were adaptations produced with the intent of honoring the source material, that it was as close as they could get to making Professor Tolkien's books come to life in a new medium where millions more people can experience the professor's stories without necessarily reading the books. On the flip side, if we look at the Star Wars sequel trilogy, those were made to unravel the previous stories. Now, the significance and emotional ties that people had to the original films would have to change, because the meaning of everything had been changed. Both of these experiences are adaptations. Even with the sequels being sequels to the original trilogy, both are adapting the stories that came before. What they do with those legacies, however, are entirely different. And so that means that the writers and the producers and directors and really the stewards of legacies have a choice when they pick up a piece of media of the past to do an adaptation. They can choose to do their best to honor that source material, or they can challenge it with the intent to devalue it, to undermine it, and more often than not, to replace it. Well, that brings us to this Damon Lindelof interview where he's asked about the adaptation wars, where he says, "Shouldn't we be beyond this by now?" No, Damon, I don't think we can be. For the record, the same man saying that we, the customer class who pays to see the movies, pays for the streaming services, buys the video games, we should just shut up and consume what they produce without question, despite the fact that what Damon himself has just produced is a television show that features Hal Jordan, a beloved legacy superhero character, being shot in the head in the very first episode of Damon's new show. It's also important to point out that Damon's Hal Jordan is a washed-up loner loser oathbreaker, and then he's shot in the head. Stop asking questions. Stop challenging the adaptations. Please just consume the slop. Well, no, because adaptation doesn't really mean adaptation, especially in the context that Lindelof and Tom King outline in this interview, where they say adaptation, what they really mean is replacement. Hollywood and the stewards of creative legacy have no interest in faithfully adapting your favorite stories into fresh new mediums. Instead, they want to kill your heroes and demoralize you so they can kill your culture. Brian Davids opens the interview by saying, whether it's Lanterns or The Odyssey or Resident Evil, there's been so much belly aching over creative license. Some of it is manufactured and disingenuous, but why do you think there's so much resistance to change when it's been proven that people rarely want more of the same? Well, we're off to a great start here with a loaded question. Even the interviewer is taking positions against the customer class public. Who are you to say that a desire for stories to remain honorable and faithful to the original is not only wrong, but fake? If it's manufactured, then it means it's fake. If it's disingenuous, then it means people are lying. Where is the proof in either of those things? If, say, I'm unhappy with the unceremonious murder and humiliation of Hal Jordan, are you claiming that I'm lying, Brian Davids? Who are you to be the arbiter on what I'm allowed to question or challenge? Well, this position is that if you argue too hard, that makes you into a grifter. Because to grift would mean to say one thing but believe something else. Do you really think people advocating that they don't like Lanterns are lying and secretly what? Love it? And if not, if they really do believe it's bad, are they not supposed to care? You see, as framed by this interviewer's question, to challenge Hollywood adaptation is to not be a customer with a complaint, but rather, you are a pathology, you're a sickness. That makes the job of writing entertainment more challenging than it should be. I love how insufferable the discourse is, Lindelof replies. Our engagement in these works generates a high level of passion, but the other level of it is this weird conceptual framework of ownership, and that's where it becomes insufferable. There's a direct corollary to the amount of time that you spend ingesting something, or thinking about something, or talking about it with your friends or communities. You begin to feel like a proprietary interest in protecting it. Oh, well, you see, that's an attack right there, and it's just a setup into a claim we haven't even gotten to yet. So if you have an emotional connection towards a story or a series or a character, and you don't like outsiders coming in and colonizing the stories you're fond of, essentially that means you're stupid, according to Lindelof here. To care is to be contaminated. The more you know and the more you care, the less you get to speak. He specifically references time invested and frames it as, again, some kind of pathology. Someone with more of a tourist's time investment is a healthy opinion to be considered, because if you care, or rather, if you challenge what we make, you're too into it, and it's unhealthy for you. That seems like a lot of projection on their part. In any other business, the longtime customer is the one you're supposed to listen to the most. But here, duration of love is evidence that you should be ignored. And already on this premise alone, can we truly say that someone like Lindelof has any authority being the steward of anything culturally significant? If you love something you are wrong is a fast track to nihilism, which is not ironic because it's exactly what is being peddled in this Lantern show. But sadly, he continues. So I think we all just have to acknowledge that there's a level of hubris involved in taking on any of this pre-existing IP. But to your point, it is called adaptation. I don't have my dictionary handy, and while I'm sure there are multiple definitions of adaptation, the one that resonates the most for me is that source material is supposed to change and evolve. Wow, this is dangerous. And we need to get a scalpel here to dissect this word for word. When he says, we all have to acknowledge there is hubris involved with taking on pre-existing IP, to the naked eye, it may seem as if he's talking about the people like him and Tom King and any other writers taking on media adaptation. And maybe in that regard, maybe it's fine. But he's also invoking that you and I and the customer class are also hubristic in trying to defend legacy stories. We all drags the audience into an act that only he is committing. So to advocate against change of legacy is to engage in hubris as much as it is to change it. But it's called adaptation, and while there are multiple definitions of adaptations, the one that resonates with me is that source material is supposed to change and evolve. Well, there it is, folks. If adaptation means multiple things, and it can if you use the biological definition in place of the arts and media definition as he has, it's unsurprising that he'd choose the definition most aligned with radically altering what the source material depicted, represented, and meant. For decades, adaptation meant bringing a creative work like a book or a play from one format of media to another with the intent of allocating more awareness and accessibility to that work. Perhaps people were never going to read Professor Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Well, now they can see the Peter Jackson trilogy and get a good enough grasp on what the books were to at least respect Professor Tolkien's work. Peter Jackson wanted to honor the professor, not replace him. But now, as Lindelof has confessed, we're following the biological, the scientific definition of adaptation today, which, at that point, we should just use a different word, because this adaptation means the process of changing or adjusting to fit new conditions, environments, or challenges. Well, if you believe that the world's conditions, environments, or challenges have changed, as many of these nihilistic writers do, then they're justified in adapting legacy stories to fit modern-day sensibilities that are fundamentally different from the original source material. The answer, partially in the case for Tom and I, is that we identify primarily as fans. We were fans of this content long before we got the opportunity to make it. Yeah, that's a qualifier. If they're fans, then they're giving themselves the authority to make decisions as experts. As a consumer and as someone who's making this stuff, there's almost a responsibility to take risks. It's not just for the sake of taking them, you've got to earn them. I don't think anybody wants to see you be completely and totally vigilant to the source material, because then it isn't an adaptation at all. Again, adaptation specifically meaning to change. It's as if he's positioning this that if Damon Lindelof is writing for a legacy property, then he must radically change it so he can comfortably call it an adaptation. But with all this talk of being vigilant to the source material, why not? And he presents it as a straw man. Why can't you try to tell a story that's close to the source? What's morally or ethically wrong with that? When you think of Green Lantern, it's not Shakespeare. We got one Green Lantern live-action film in 2011, and it was universally disliked. What's wrong with trying to do a faithful, heroic story about Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart? Why not allow them to be Green Lanterns trying to solve intergalactic crimes? Well, it's because that's what we would expect. We would expect them to wear their suits. We'd expect them to honor the Green Lantern oath and take it seriously. We'd expect them to maybe have some friction, of course. That gives us a little drama. But we wouldn't expect them to outright hate each other and be racist. No, that's what gives us the proper adaptation in their eyes. Jon Stewart hating on Hal for being a white guy is part of adaptation. Then Davids asks Tom King, what's your take on this tug of war? To me, at the end of the day, it's quality. Adaptations have to do two things at once. They have to stand on their own, and they have to talk to the old material. If they can't stand on their own, then what you're going to see is how you misinterpreted the old material. So, quality is always just the apex of everything. Oh. So quality is a solvent for deconstructionism. If the new thing is critically acclaimed as good TV, then the radical deconstruction of the source material and what it initially represented is justified, as per your claim. He also gives us an answer as to why we have something here named Lanterns, but it's not a Green Lantern story, or at least not in the way we imagined. It truly is Green Lanterns in name only, specifically because they're trying to make something that entirely stands on its own while hijacking the names, locations, and objects of the legacy story. Why wouldn't they just make the original stories, you might ask? Well, King confesses here that they are making original stories inside of your stories. Like a cancer. In a place where they, one, know they can get projects greenlit because legacy IP is easier to sell, but two, they know you're more inclined to participate in consuming the media because it has legacy IP attached. Lindelof says there is a fundamental grumbling and annoyance that we're still telling the same stories over and over and over again, but at the same time, we're hungry for something new. Is there? Is there really? Who is it that's doing the grumbling? We'll get a better look in his next statement. And because we don't want to resolve or acknowledge that paradox in ourselves, we throw it onto the culture. It manifests itself in conversations about whether or not Odysseus is having enough sex. What are you talking about? I'm a YouTuber that covered the Odyssey. I've watched friends battle out arguing about this movie. Not a single one of them, or a comment that we got, ever was discussing whether or not Odysseus was having enough sex in the Christopher Nolan film. Which means that, Damon, if those are the conversations you were engaging in when it comes to the Odyssey, then it says a lot more about you than about the general public. And if, at the scale of discussing the Odyssey, that is as far as your conversations were going, then perhaps one, you could be a pervert in my humble opinion, but two, and more importantly, you're not the best judge of determining what is or isn't relevant for the culture at large. Perhaps you're trapped in some kind of perverted echo chamber. Hollywood writers and Hollywood creatives trapped in a perverted echo chamber? Say it ain't so, comments. Tell me this is not real. No, perversions aside, these writers don't have a pulse on what normal people want, let alone what the fans want. A few months ago, we had Project Hail Mary, and publications like The Hollywood Reporter were running articles like, "We need more Hope Core," because everything Hollywood peddles today is hopeless. They peddle nihilism, dressed in superhero spandex. So when we get things that are optimistic or hopeful or really just have a positive outlook on the human existence, it's framed by the media as this big thing that's been done. But that's how it used to be. We used to get stories that challenged and explored the human experience, but it was pro-humanity. Today, Lindelof's Lanterns is some of the most hateful and angry, dispirited television I've had the displeasure of watching. Which, take something like the Westies on MGM+, right? I know a lot of you didn't see it, but this is a show where virtually all the characters are some flavor of bad guy. But that show is ridiculously compelling and empowers you, the viewer, to be hopeful that these people will get their lives together and course correct. Because there is an unspoken kind of hope. There is optimism. You watch Lanterns and you're getting lectured by a grandma lot lizard that rich white people are bad guys. Which brings us to the next piece of this discussion. Wizard, you claim that adaptation is cultural death, but all of human history has featured the adaptation of stories. Yes, it has. That's right. All of human history is a story, a series of stories, passed down for all generations. Sometimes to entertain, yes, but more often to learn from. The textbooks you read in school are the stories of history. Science and mathematics are the stories of how things work. Movies, books, fiction are the stories of culture. Cultural values and beliefs and ideals. What a human being is supposed to be when it counts is found in the stories of culture. If you change the stories that the culture consumes, you change the perception of reality. Parents taught their children what courage is, what an oath means, what heroism looks like through stories, and through those same stories also what villains looked like, what evil does, and how heroes must be present to challenge evil. And over time, those tales adapted. They changed. They did. The mediums of which to tell stories changed. The characters changed. The names and locations and conflicts, they all changed. If you look at every culture around the world throughout all of history, you will find hero myths that all feature the same puzzle pieces of stories, but the actual specific events that characters experience are all different. And yet, inside of all that change, what we never lost was an optimism towards humanity. But right there, we find something that transcends time and language. We have cultures that never interacted and never could have communicated, telling stories that have the same bones of cultures that are worlds away. Which means that part of being human is to wrestle with ideals of courage and honor and heroism, but moreover, right and wrong. But okay, plots change. Stories change, as we said. Robin Hood was a commoner for a couple hundred years before someone decided to rewrite him as being a dispossessed nobleman. King Arthur didn't have Lancelot until a French poet showed up and wrote Lancelot into the story. The Greeks rewrote each other constantly. Change always happens. But what they changed to and from is different than it is today. Every one of those stories that got rewritten 100 times over kept the same things at their core, like a heart of it all. Oaths still meant something. Cowardice costs you. Putting others before yourself is altruism. There is a reason to live. There's a reason you're here, which means that you can rename Robin Hood. You can give him a castle or take it away. All of that is a kind of packaging to a core that remains unchanged. But what happens when you keep the packaging but replace the core? What happens when you tear the heart out of the stories but keep the shell? And mind you, this is not being done on accident. We have a whole interview here that we just went through where the writers are admitting it to you. If you do this long enough, then you get what we battle with daily right now. You get nihilism. And we need to be precise on this. Nihilism is not darkness. It's not a sad ending. It's not a hero dying or a hero failing. Greek tragedy is some of the most brutal literature humanity has produced, but it is not nihilistic. Not even a little bit, because inside of true tragedy, there is intense moral order. There is always a cause, a reason, and a meaning behind all the suffering of a tragedy. There is always a meaning to one's life. Nihilism is the opposite, that there is no point, there is nothing, there is no reason to care, there is no standard of which to fall short of. It's just events that happen to people who don't matter. in a universe that isn't watching. And you think it should be impossible to arrive at nothing means anything with a character like Hal Jordan, for instance, whose entire mechanical premise is that willpower is a physical force in the universe. Even for Sinestro here, fear is a physical force. There is relevant meaning behind both willpower and fear, and so, because nihilism doesn't work naturally in that world, you must inject it dishonestly. You have to take the man, make him an oathbreaker. Oh, and the oath is silly and we rush through it anyway. We have no respect for the oath. The Guardians themselves, they seem like they'll be bad guys too, but just to make sure, Hal is a loser. We're gonna make him a liar. We're gonna make him the guy nobody would follow across the street, let alone across the galaxy. And then we're gonna put a bullet in his head in the first episode so that the audience understands immediately without question that whatever they thought this was going to be about, it isn't. Some people use deconstruction as the term. You may call it subversion, call it whatever you want. But the intent is to demoralize the stories and their values and what they mean. But also to demoralize you, the viewer, so that you no longer hold these stories and these characters to the standards that you once did. See, if Hal Jordan no longer upholds the virtues of willpower being a superpower anymore, then there's no reason for you to take Hal seriously. You'll detach from him. Just another legacy hero that, well, now he doesn't represent what he used to represent, and it's all negative, so why should I care? All of your heroes are dead and you misunderstood them. But it goes even further than that. This isn't about you. They don't care whether you like Hal Jordan or not. They don't care what you think about Superman or Luke Skywalker or Han Solo or any of your heroes. But they do care what the normies think, though. And they care about what your children think, too. See, the normies, like children, are impressionable. Change the stories, change the meaning, and you change what people take away from the stories. Like we said, all stories are there for us to learn things from. And a lot of the time, it's us learning about ourselves and how we perceive the world. If all the stories of heroes are demoralized and they stand for nothing, well, that's standing for something, actually. That's standing for the principles of nihilism. They're not hiding it anymore. That's the part I really hope you internalize here. It's not like there's a leak or a whistleblower. This is a belief system, and they're admitting to it. We have writers here admitting that they'll repackage legacy stories if it gets them positive critical acclaim and awards. And this is just two guys. We have interviews with writers, producers, and creatives all over the West admitting the same thing. Christopher Nolan admitted it in China just a couple weeks ago. So what are you supposed to do? What do you do under all of this pressure? Well, it's very obvious, and you're not gonna like me saying it. You must create your own. That's it. That's the solution. They're going to keep making nihilistic content regardless of whoever owns whatever companies. You have to make your own stories, and I know that's not the answer you wanted to hear. But please think about it this way. Your kids cannot miss what they never had. Many of you grew up with a phone bolted to the kitchen wall. I grew up rewinding VHS tapes, right? Many of you did too. Kids today have no concept of those things. If you explain it to them, it's like some kind of otherworldly concept. And so now apply that to the culture. How can you expect those kids to mourn the death of your culture? It's your culture. You didn't do anything to fight for it when you could. You let stewards take over the operations of storytelling, kill off your heroes, first spiritually, then physically, then retroactively. Yes, look at The Acolyte. Kill the heroes and what they stand for in the sequels, and then go back in a prequel to kill any possibility of meaning from the get-go. You were raised in what I would call one of the greatest eras of human expression. We had amazing movies, we had amazing shows, and we had great books, and we had good video games. We had new stories every single week for decades. Some were mediocre, but many of those were still memorable. They were worth remembering. What do your children have? Do your children sound like you when you were a kid? Do your kids even hold the same values for human life as you do? Are your children sounding a whole lot more adult and perhaps mature at younger and younger ages? That's odd, huh? George Orwell said, "Who controls the past controls the future." People usually equate that to book burning and propaganda in kind of a wartime. Well, that might be true, and I think it is, but it's stories. It's always been about stories. If the stories of the past mean nothing, if everything we are is nothing, then why is there any reason to care about ourselves or each other or the future? At that point, there isn't. And so I say to you today, we are at war. But this war isn't being fought with rockets and bombs. It's being fought with pencils and lectures and keyboards and stories. So you best start believing in war stories. You're in one. Until next time, create, innovate, inspire. Cancel Disney Plus. Cancel HBO. Don't watch Lanterns. Don't give them the time of day. I'll see you next time.